Hundreds of migrants are facing shelter evictions today as new rules go into effect.
Yeah, this affects a lot of people. While some extenuating circumstances are considered, it won't be easy.
Today, our cities are flooded with illegal aliens. Americans are being squeezed out of the labor force and their jobs are taken.
In response to New York's mayor, the White House said it is limited in the ways that it can help without action from Congress.
The newly elected President of the United States, Donald Trump, has announced plans to implement a large-scale deportation program targeting undocumented immigrants by declaring a national emergency. This declaration would effectively enable the use of military force to carry out these deportations. The concept of mass deportations has been one of Trump's signature campaign promises during the election period. In his first term, Trump similarly declared a national emergency to redirect Pentagon funds toward constructing a border wall with Mexico. Trump has also revealed a cabinet filled with officials known for their hardline stances on immigration issues. Among them, he appointed former Immigration and Customs Enforcement Chief Tom Homan as his so-called border czar. Homan, a prominent figure in immigration enforcement, made an appearance at the Republican National Convention in July 2024, where he addressed supporters with pointed criticism of Joe Biden. Homan accused Biden of sending a message to millions of undocumented immigrants that they would be welcomed into the country without consequences. He even went as far as to suggest that American citizens should start packing their belongings now, implying that the nation would be overrun by undocumented migrants under Biden's leadership. Throughout his campaigns, Trump has frequently disparaged undocumented migrants, describing them as outsiders who poison the blood of the United States. He has repeatedly stated his intention to invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to expedite deportations. This law, which many legal experts consider outdated, was most notably used during World War II to detain Japanese Americans in internment camps without due process, an act widely condemned today as a grave violation of civil liberties. The proposed use of military force to address immigration issues has sparked widespread concern and controversy. Critics argue that Trump's obsession with aggressive immigration policies poses significant risks, particularly to undocumented immigrants and the communities along the U.S.-Mexico border. A writer for The New Yorker described these measures as inherently racist, stating that the administration's actions not only aim to strengthen enforcement capabilities, but also intentionally instill fear among immigrant communities. By creating an atmosphere of intimidation, the administration could effectively pressure many undocumented individuals to leave the United States, feeling they have no other choice. Trump's chief immigration advisor, Stephen Miller, has announced a bold plan. The administration aims to deport 1 million people per year. As of 2022, an estimated 30 million immigrants were working in the United States. Of that number, 22.2 million were legally authorized workers, while the remainder were undocumented. The United States remains one of the most sought-after destinations for immigrants worldwide, attracting more migrants than the combined total of 4 major nations: Germany, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the United Kingdom. According to the Migration Policy Institute, while the U.S. population accounts for just 5% of the global total, nearly 20% of all international migrants reside in the United States. In 2022, approximately 46.2 million immigrants were living in the U.S., the largest number in the nation's history. That year, immigrants made up 13.9% of the total U.S. population. While this figure is below the record high of 14.8% set in 1890, it slightly surpasses the 13.7% recorded in 2019, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Migration Policy Institute also reports that 10.7 million U.S. residents born in Mexico represented the largest immigrant group in the country in 2022. However, their numbers have declined by about 1 million since 2010. Mexican immigrants constituted 23% of the immigrant population in 2022, down from 29% in 2010. Meanwhile, immigrants from India and China have become increasingly significant contributors to the overall migrant population. In total, immigrants and their U.S.-born children accounted for approximately 90.8 million individuals in 2023, making up 27% of the nation's civilian non-institutional population. This reflects a substantial increase of 14.7 million people, or 20%, since 2010. The arrival of immigrants in the United States dates back at least to the late 1800s. Many left their homelands to escape failed crops, land shortages, unemployment, rising taxes, and famine. Others sought refuge in the U.S., drawn by its reputation as a land of economic opportunity. Some came in search of freedom or asylum from political and religious persecution. Between 1870 and 1900 alone, nearly 12 million immigrants arrived in the United States. During the 1870s and 1880s, most of these immigrants came from Germany, Ireland, and England. Additionally, a significant number of Chinese immigrants migrated to the U.S. between the onset of the California Gold Rush in 1849 and the passage of federal legislation in 1882 that severely restricted Chinese immigration. These newcomers faced both opportunity and hardship as they sought to build new lives in a foreign land. According to the Migration Policy Institute, as of 2022, the U.S. states with the highest immigrant populations were California, Texas, Florida, New York, and New Jersey. Immigrants also represented a significant percentage of these states' total populations: California, New Jersey, New York, Florida, and Nevada. At the metropolitan level, New York City had the largest immigrant population, with around 5.9 million immigrants residing in the area between 2018 and 2022. It was followed by Los Angeles and then Miami and Chicago and Houston. While California is home to the largest number of immigrants in the U.S., New York deserves special attention in discussions about immigration. As the historic gateway for immigrants from around the world, New York has long held a prominent place in America's immigrant story. It remains the state with the second largest immigrant population in the nation and a symbol of the opportunities that drew millions to American shores. In earlier times, immigrants entered the United States through various ports. Those arriving from Europe typically came through facilities on the East Coast, while immigrants from Asia often entered via West Coast processing centers. Over 70% of all immigrants passed through New York City, which earned the nickname the Golden Door. During the late 1800s, most immigrants arriving in New York were processed at Castle Garden Depot near the southern tip of Manhattan. In 1892, the federal government opened a new immigration processing center on Ellis Island in New York Harbor, further solidifying the city's role as the primary gateway for immigrants to America. Over the years, immigrants have played a central role in shaping and building the state of New York. Even undocumented immigrants contribute significantly to the state's economy. They pay various taxes, including sales tax, excise tax, property tax, income tax, and payroll tax. These contributions help fund New York's infrastructure, institutions, and public services, highlighting their critical role in supporting the state. As of 2022, 10.9 million undocumented immigrants were living and working in the United States. According to the New York Immigration Coalition, these individuals contributed an impressive $3.1 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. However, despite their contributions, undocumented immigrants are excluded from accessing the benefits funded by their tax dollars, such as Social Security, Medicare, and unemployment insurance. Ironically, the annual per-person tax contribution of undocumented immigrants in New York exceeds the combined state budgets of Delaware, South Dakota, Montana, New Hampshire, Vermont, Idaho, Maine, Oklahoma, Alaska, Iowa, Wyoming, Nebraska, and Rhode Island. Nationwide, undocumented immigrants account for 4.7% of the U.S. labor force, underscoring their integral role in the country's workforce, despite the lack of recognition or benefits for their efforts.
Migrants don't want to be in shelter for the rest of their lives. They're here just to get a little bit opportunity to get out, and once they get a little job or something that they can help their families, we're already experiencing them going elsewhere and going other places where they can build community.
Undocumented immigration remains a contentious issue because it involves violations of immigration laws. Many undocumented immigrants are individuals fleeing violence in their home countries, such as abduction, sexual assault, or forced recruitment into gangs, while also seeking better economic opportunities. A significant number cross borders unlawfully, often driven by extreme poverty or displacement. For instance, groups like the Rohingya in Southeast Asia, who face human trafficking and persecution, exemplify those forced to migrate under dire circumstances. Some immigrants arrive legally, but fall into undocumented status due to overstaying their visas. These individuals often find life in the U.S. more appealing or economically advantageous, leading them to remain despite their visas expiring.
Queremos llegar al país, a producirle al país, a pagar impuestos, a pagar todo para poder ayudar a la familia de nosotros, ¿sí me entienden? Se están muriendo de hambre allá en Venezuela.
Human trafficking also plays a role in illegal immigration, with victims brought into the country under false pretenses, only to find themselves trapped without proper documentation. While undocumented immigrants contribute positively to the economy in places like New York, their presence can also lead to challenges for local communities. Those without documentation and excluded from formal employment opportunities often turn to illegal activities for financial survival. This can include involvement in drug trafficking, prostitution, theft, and robbery. Some undocumented immigrants also become entangled in human trafficking networks, perpetuating cycles of exploitation and facilitating the arrival of more illegal migrants. For others, the pressures of living as undocumented immigrants, facing economic hardships, social exclusion, and constant fear of deportation can lead to tragic outcomes such as suicide or, in rare cases, violence. In early September 2024, a man from the Dominican Republic, using a fake New York State ID, committed a horrific crime by killing an entire family in their own home. According to Newsweek, the Dominican man is believed to have entered the United States illegally via Puerto Rico, eventually obtaining a counterfeit New York State identification card that allowed him to access the mainland. While the motive behind the crime remains unclear, incidents like this intensify the discomfort many New Yorkers feel toward the presence of undocumented immigrants. Such events have fueled attitudes ranging from distrust to outright rejection of undocumented immigrants, sometimes giving rise to overt racism. From the perspective of the White House, undocumented immigrants are often labeled as criminals who undermine the economy by taking jobs that might otherwise go to American citizens. This perspective has led to widespread support for Trump's strict immigration policies among many stakeholders, particularly members of the Republican Party and Trump's voter base. Nearly 9 out of 10 Republican supporters, approximately 86%, view combating illegal immigration as a key priority for the United States. While even non-Trump Republicans agree with many of Trump's measures, they tend to advocate for systems that provide pathways for those fleeing violence to immigrate legally. Democrats, on the other hand, generally favor policies that make it easier for immigrants to enter and reside in the United States legally. However, they also support stricter penalties for businesses that knowingly hire individuals without proper work authorization. Among their broader priorities, Democrats advocate for reforms addressing future immigration flows, while considering the millions of undocumented immigrants already living in the United States. Liberal-leaning Democrats, in particular, are more likely to support comprehensive measures such as creating pathways for undocumented immigrants to transition to legal status or eventually gain citizenship.